For weeks, whispers inside royal circles pointed toward one extraordinary possibility: Meghan Markle was preparing to return to Britain for an appearance powerful enough to reshape her public image. But as the date approached, private conversations began to reveal that something had already gone dangerously wrong. This was never meant to be a routine engagement. Meghan's expected return carried the weight of years spent away from Britain. Years filled with public attacks, broken trust, and unanswered questions about what had truly happened behind palace doors. For her supporters, it could have marked the beginning of a new chapter. For her critics, it offered another chance to question her motives. And for the monarchy, it threatened to reopen a conflict that had never fully disappeared. Before we continue, subscribe to the channel for more hidden royal stories, palace secrets, and dramatic moments the monarchy would rather keep behind closed doors. Organizers understood the scale of what was approaching. Plans were reportedly being made for intense security, crowded press areas, international coverage, and the possibility that every movement Meghan made would become a headline. Her arrival would not simply be watched. It would be studied. Every expression, every word, and every person standing beside her would be pulled apart for meaning. For Meghan, returning to Britain meant facing the place where her royal journey had begun with enormous promise. She had once entered that world believing she could serve, belong, and create change. Instead, she left feeling exposed, isolated, and betrayed by the very institution that had promised protection. Coming back now would require more than courage. It would require control. Harry saw the danger immediately. He knew how quickly an appearance could become a trap. In his mind, Britain was not just a location. It was the center of old wounds, family silence, and a press machine he believed had caused lasting damage. He feared Meghan would once again be placed inside a system where others decided what her presence meant. Then, the delays began. Travel discussions shifted. Questions from organizers remained unanswered. Security arrangements were not confirmed. Private conversations became less certain. People close to the planning began wondering whether Meghan's attendance had ever been guaranteed at all. At the same time, someone linked to the royal establishment was reportedly asking unusually detailed questions. Where would Meghan sit? Who would control press access? Would Harry appear beside her? What security conditions had she requested? Most importantly, would her return be presented as reconciliation? The British press was already preparing competing stories. Some predicted a healing moment. Others expected confrontation. A few appeared convinced she would never arrive. That was when the appearance stopped looking like an invitation and began looking like a test of power. Meghan wanted to return on her own terms. Behind palace doors, others allegedly wanted strict limits on what her presence could represent. The greatest danger was no longer public criticism. It was being drawn into a carefully managed royal narrative she could not control. And as the public countdown continued, the real battle was already unfolding in private, through conditions, warnings, and one hidden demand that changed the meaning of Meghan's return completely. The invitation looked respectable, carefully worded, and impossible to criticize. Yet behind its polished language sat a series of conditions that allegedly left Meghan questioning whether she was truly being welcomed back or being summoned into a public performance designed by people who still wanted to control her. The restrictions were not presented as threats. They appeared as practical details. Arrival times, approved routes, limited press contact, carefully controlled statements. Even the people Meghan would be allowed to meet seemed to be part of a wider plan. Individually, each condition could be explained. Together, they created something far more troubling: a return in which almost every part of Meghan's presence would be managed before she reached Britain. Her concern was not simply about where she would stand or when she would speak. Meghan allegedly wanted a clear promise that the appearance would not be portrayed as a royal reconciliation, unless she and Harry approved that message themselves. She feared that one brief greeting could be turned into proof that the past had been forgiven. The conflict had ended, and the monarchy had regained control of the story. Security became another source of tension. Intense public attention was expected, along with hostile commentary and crowds that could not be fully predicted. Meghan wanted protection she believed matched the risk. Without it, she could be placed in a vulnerable position while still being expected to appear calm, grateful, and cooperative. There were also disagreements over Harry. Would they travel together? Would Meghan appear alone? Would he remain beside her throughout the engagement? Or would organizers separate the couple from anything that looked too closely connected to royal affairs? Every option carried consequences. Palace-connected figures reportedly wanted dignity, silence, and order. Meghan's team saw something else. The demand for calm could become a demand for obedience. The desire to avoid controversy could mean she would be unable to defend herself if the event was later described in a way she rejected. Then came the argument over the press. Outlets that had attacked Meghan for years were expected to receive strong access. That meant the people most likely to criticize her could also become the first to define her return. Harry believed every detail could be weaponized. A smile might be called surrender. A serious expression might be described as anger. A short meeting could become reconciliation. No meeting at all could become rejection. But one private condition went deeper. Meghan was allegedly expected to show visible deference in a carefully arranged position near senior royal representatives. To others, it was protocol. To Meghan, it was a message. She was not only being told where to stand, she was being reminded who still expected to define her place. Accepting could make her appear eager for royal approval. Refusing could revive every accusation that she was difficult. Then, as the deadline approached, a late communication arrived from Britain. But the conditions alone did not destroy the plan. The turning point came when a private message reached Meghan and Harry, one that transformed their concerns into a far more personal warning. Just as preparations appeared to be moving forward, a warning allegedly reached the Sussexes from someone familiar with palace strategy. The message was simple but devastating. Meghan's return would not be treated as a fresh beginning. It would become a test, and powerful people were waiting for her to fail. The warning reportedly came from someone who understood the machinery behind royal appearances. How private planning, media access, palace expectations, and public reaction could be shaped long before an event began. According to the message, Meghan would not simply be welcomed, observed, or photographed. She would be measured. Every gesture could become evidence. A nervous pause might be called weakness. A firm expression could be described as defiance. A smile toward a royal representative might be presented as surrender, while distance could be framed as bitterness. Photographers, commentators, and palace observers were allegedly prepared to examine her for signs that Britain still held emotional power over her. For Meghan, the warning reopened memories she had spent years trying to place behind her. The hostile headlines, the rigid rules, the restricted conversations. The feeling that private pain could be turned into public entertainment while the institution remained protected by silence. Returning now risked placing her inside that same pattern, only this time with the entire world waiting for a reaction. Harry's response was immediate. To him, the message confirmed his deepest fear. The environment had not truly changed. Meghan would once again be expected to carry unbearable pressure, while others praised the dignity of the occasion. The institution would receive the image it wanted, and she would absorb the emotional cost. Yet Meghan was not ready to withdraw. Part of her believed attending was the stronger choice. Pulling out could look like fear. It could allow critics to claim she had lost the courage to face Britain. Harry saw that determination differently. He feared she was being drawn toward a familiar trap simply to prove that she could survive it. Her team still believed the appearance could work if Meghan controlled her own message, chose her words, and avoided anything presented as a royal reunion. But then, another condition emerged. Senior figures allegedly wanted reassurance that she would not discuss past grievances before, during, or after the visit. No document called it a silence agreement. It did not need to. The meaning was clear. Meghan could return. But only if she did not challenge the version of history the institution preferred. That changed everything. She began questioning whether the invitation was about inclusion at all, or whether her presence was needed to create an image of calm after years of division. With the deadline approaching, organizers demanded final travel plans, security confirmation, and a clear answer. Attend and risk being controlled. Withdraw and be accused of running away. Speak and reopen the war. Remain silent and allow others to define the truth. Then, only days before the appearance, the silence broke. A final decision was delivered, and the people preparing for Meghan's arrival suddenly realized she was not coming at all. The confirmation arrived without ceremony. Meghan Markle had pulled out of the major UK appearance, leaving organizers scrambling, commentators stunned, and royal circles demanding answers. But the withdrawal was not simply a scheduling change. It was the final act in a private confrontation that had become impossible to contain. After days of uncertainty, the answer was finally delivered. Meghan would remain in California. She would not board the flight, enter the venue, or take part in the appearance that had already become an international story. The decision came only after prolonged negotiations over security, protocol, press access, and the way her return would be presented to the public. For organizers, the effect was immediate. Security plans had to be reconsidered. Press positions prepared around Meghan's expected arrival suddenly lost their purpose. Guests who had anticipated the most closely watched royal-related appearance in years were left wondering what had happened behind the scenes. International outlets had already built coverage around her return. Now they were preparing for the scandal of her absence. The public explanation remained careful. Family priorities were mentioned. Security concerns were allowed to linger. Scheduling pressures and Meghan's responsibilities in California offered a respectable shield. Nothing in the official language suggested open conflict. Privately, however, a far more explosive story was spreading. Meghan had allegedly decided that the conditions surrounding her return were no longer acceptable. She refused to enter an event where her movements, position, words, and interactions could be controlled by people she did not trust. To her, attending under those rules would not prove strength. It would confirm that the institution could still summon her back and define the meaning of her presence. Harry supported the decision, but he understood exactly what would follow. The word again would become a weapon. Critics would call it another broken expectation, another last-minute retreat, another sign that Meghan wanted attention without facing Britain. Supporters would argue that repeated withdrawals pointed to unresolved danger, not indecision. What disturbed the Sussexes most was how quickly the attacks appeared. Almost immediately, Meghan was described as afraid, unreliable, attention-seeking, and unwilling to face the British public. The language felt prepared. The accusations arrived before the real reasons had even been examined. Meghan was furious that the cancellation became a greater scandal than the restrictions that caused it. Harry began asking whether the invitation had ever been genuine. Had Meghan been offered a return, or had she been forced into a choice between submission and public retreat? The palace now faced a problem it had not expected. Meghan was absent, yet her absence dominated the event more completely than her attendance might have. And behind the controlled public response, one senior royal figure was said to be deeply disturbed, not merely by Meghan's decision, but by what the failed negotiations had exposed. Meghan had removed herself from the event, but she had not escaped the struggle surrounding it. Inside royal circles, Her absence triggered blame, fear, and a question no one wanted to answer publicly. Who had pushed the situation too far? Behind palace doors, disappointment quickly turned into accusation. Some believed Meghan had embarrassed the organizers. Others feared the monarchy had repeated the same mistakes that drove Harry away. And one private argument allegedly exposed how divided the royal household remained over the Sussexes and their place in Britain. The failed appearance was no longer being treated as a simple cancellation. Advisors, organizers, and palace-connected figures reportedly began asking who had mishandled the negotiations, who had approved the conditions, and who had allowed the situation to become an international embarrassment. No one wanted responsibility. Everyone wanted an explanation. One faction claimed Meghan had never seriously intended to attend. In their view, the invitation gave her publicity, renewed attention, and another opportunity to remain at the center of the royal conversation without accepting the limits that came with returning. They argued that every condition had been reasonable and that her withdrawal proved she wanted control without compromise. Another group saw something far more troubling. They believed the demands had been so rigid that Meghan's refusal was almost inevitable. Security questions remained unresolved, press concerns were dismissed, protocol was treated as untouchable. To them, the palace had offered Meghan a doorway while making certain she could not comfortably walk through it. The event itself now faced a serious problem. Instead of attention falling on its purpose, every conversation centered on why Meghan was missing. Her absence had become the main attraction, and the monarchy appeared trapped inside a controversy it had hoped to contain. A senior royal figure allegedly questioned why the invitation had been extended before the old disputes were settled. The same issues that had caused years of conflict, protection, press access, public messaging, and control had simply been carried into a new negotiation and expected to disappear. The palace feared appearing weak. Granting Meghan greater freedom could look like surrendering to her demands. Refusing it had produced another damaging headline. Either way, the institution seemed to lose. Harry's name soon entered the accusations. Some believed he had encouraged Meghan's distrust and turned manageable concerns into a crisis. Others argued that he had done exactly what the palace once failed to do, protect his wife before the damage became irreversible. The deeper conflict was generational. Older figures believed duty meant enduring discomfort without public complaint. Meghan believed boundaries were necessary after years of emotional pain. Neither side saw compromise in the same way. Then came a more revealing claim. Meghan's presence had reportedly been expected to soften the monarchy's image abroad and create a rare public sign of unity. Her absence, therefore, removed more than a guest. It destroyed a carefully anticipated message. Advisors now wanted distance. The palace could not appear responsible for the collapse. But as private frustration grew, selective details from the negotiations began moving beyond closed rooms. The private blame might have remained contained if no one had spoken. But as carefully chosen details began reaching the press, the withdrawal became something more dangerous, a battle over who would control the truth. Within hours, anonymous claims began appearing across the British media. Meghan had demanded too much. Harry had interfered. Organizers had lost patience. Yet the timing of the reports suggested something unsettling. Someone had prepared the public story before the final decision was even announced. The headlines moved with remarkable speed. Unnamed insiders described Meghan as hesitant, difficult, and determined to receive special treatment before agreeing to return. Some reports suggested that her demands had become impossible to satisfy. Others claimed Harry had complicated the discussions by questioning every detail and refusing to trust those responsible for the event. But buried inside those stories were pieces of information that should never have been public. References to travel arrangements, security discussions, press access, and Meghan's concerns about protocol appeared with enough detail to suggest that the claims had come from inside the negotiations. Only a small group of organizers, advisors, and representatives had known what was being discussed. Meghan's team reportedly reached a disturbing conclusion. The private conversations had not simply leaked. They had been selected, stripped of context, and released in a way that made her look unreasonable. Missing from the reports were the security fears surrounding uncontrolled crowds. There was little mention of Meghan's concern that hostile outlets would be given privileged access to define her return. Her objections to symbolic demands involving position and public deference were reduced to complaints about where she would stand. Harry had seen this pattern before. Private words entered the public arena, unnamed sources remained protected, and Meghan was blamed for reacting to pressure no one else was required to acknowledge. To him, the institution could stay silent, while people connected to it shaped the entire story. Then, the counterclaims began. Sources sympathetic to the Sussexes insisted Meghan had originally been prepared to attend. According to them, the decision changed only after the terms became more restrictive and the guarantees she requested failed to arrive. The public narrative split in two. One version presented Meghan as unreliable, someone who created expectations and then disappeared. The other portrayed her as a woman refusing to return to a system that still wanted to control her movements, words, and public meaning. Ironically, her absence created more attention than the palace had hoped her attendance would bring. Questions multiplied. Speculation intensified. The event was now trapped beneath the controversy. Then, one report crossed a line. It revealed a private emotional concern Meghan had shared during negotiations, something connected to her fear of reliving the isolation she had experienced before leaving royal life. She did not see that detail as ordinary speculation. She saw it as betrayal. There was growing suspicion that the leak carried a warning. Remain silent, or more private details might follow. Harry considered responding publicly, but any statement risked reopening the entire conflict. Meghan, however, began considering something more dangerous to those controlling the narrative, explaining the decision herself. For years, silence had allowed others to explain Meghan's motives for her. But this time, the pressure surrounding her withdrawal pushed the Sussexes toward a response that threatened to expose the private machinery behind royal appearances. Harry now faced the decision that had followed him since leaving royal life: remain silent and watch Meghan carry the blame, or defend her and risk another open confrontation with his family. This time, however, the consequences reached far beyond a single cancelled appearance. To Harry, silence had never been neutral. Again and again, he believed it had protected the institution while leaving Meghan exposed to accusations, rumors, and carefully shaped stories. The palace could avoid direct involvement. Unnamed sources could speak freely, and Meghan would be forced to defend herself against claims no official figure was willing to own. But speaking carried its own danger. Any public response could be used as proof that Harry remained angry, hostile, and determined to attack his family. Even a calm explanation might be framed as another act of rebellion. The moment he defended Meghan, the conversation could shift away from the leaked negotiations and return to the old claim that he was unwilling to move forward. Meghan was more cautious. She did not want her withdrawal presented as a fresh attack on the monarchy. A detailed statement might answer the leaks, but it could also pull her back into the same cycle she had tried to escape: accusation, response, denial, and another wave of headlines. That difference created tension between them. Harry wanted to challenge the claims before they hardened into accepted truth. Meghan considered refusing to participate at all. She believed silence could sometimes deny the story more power. Harry feared it would simply give others permission to speak for her. Beneath his anger was something deeper. He could not separate the pressure surrounding Meghan from the memories of his mother. To him, Princess Diana's suffering remained a warning about what could happen when media obsession, private isolation, and institutional control were allowed to grow unchecked. He had spent years promising himself that he would not watch history repeat itself. Advisors suggested a carefully worded response, focused on family priorities, safety, and personal boundaries. It would accuse no one directly. Yet even that carried risk. Every phrase would be examined for hidden meaning. Every omission would be treated as evidence of a larger feud. Then Harry received a private message urging restraint until the UK appearance was over. The appeal reportedly spoke of family unity, royal duty, and the need to protect the stability of senior relatives. It sounded gentle, but Harry understood the pressure beneath it. He was being asked to choose: defend Meghan publicly and damage what remained of his family relationships, or preserve those fragile ties by allowing her to carry the blame. In the end, Harry supported her absence without revealing every private detail. It was not surrender. It was a warning. Meghan would not return under the old conditions, and the palace could not be certain how long the Sussexes would continue protecting its secrets. As the day of the appearance finally arrived, Meghan remained thousands of miles away. Yet her absence followed every guest into the room, turning an event designed to project confidence into a silent referendum on the monarchy's unresolved war with the Sussexes. The event went ahead without Meghan, but nothing unfolded as planned. Every speech, arrival, and carefully arranged photograph seemed haunted by the same unanswered question. What would have happened if she had come, and what did her refusal reveal about the monarchy's power over her now? Organizers tried to keep attention fixed on the official purpose of the appearance, but Meghan's absence had already become the larger story. Commentators debated whether she had missed a rare chance to repair her relationship with Britain or escaped a situation that had been designed to reduce her to a carefully managed symbol. The palace had hoped for calm, dignity, and perhaps even the suggestion of unity. Instead, unresolved questions followed the event from beginning to end. Why had the security concerns remained unsettled? Who had shaped the protocol conditions? Why had private details reached the press so quickly? And why had Meghan's return required restrictions that seemed to revive the very conflict everyone claimed to want buried? Her withdrawal revealed a shift the institution could no longer ignore. Royal pressure could still affect Meghan, but it could no longer compel her. She was no longer required to enter a room where others controlled her position, her words, and the meaning of her presence. Harry stood firmly beside her, even knowing the decision would widen the distance between him and his family. Critics called the absence fear. Supporters called it self-protection. To them, Meghan had finally refused to sacrifice emotional safety for the approval of people who had never fully understood the damage she carried. Privately, organizers were said to admit that her appearance would have transformed the occasion. That acknowledgement exposed the contradiction at the center of the crisis. The establishment wanted the attention Meghan could bring, but not the freedom she demanded in return. The hidden protocol condition now appeared more important than ever. It had not merely concerned where Meghan would stand. It represented the line she refused to cross, the expectation that returning to Britain meant accepting a place chosen for her by the same system she no longer trusted. Her withdrawal did not end speculation about another UK appearance. It raised the price of the next invitation. Any future return would require real security, control over public messaging, and terms negotiated with Meghan rather than dictated through tradition. Whether the monarchy understood, that remained uncertain. Perhaps it recognized why she withdrew. Perhaps it still believed the problem was Meghan's refusal to obey. That was the deepest shock. Meghan had not simply pulled out again. The palace could no longer command her presence, her silence, or even the meaning of the empty space she left behind. Trust had weakened. Family ties had hardened, and the next invitation could force a confrontation far more explosive than this one, because Meghan's withdrawal was never only about one appearance. It was a warning that the next chapter between the Sussexes and the monarchy will not be decided by tradition alone, and when that confrontation arrives, neither side may be able to retreat quietly.